These are some pretty extraordinary revelations from the Four Corners program. What would you like to see the New South Wales government do next?
It's shocking revelations that we're hearing about what's going on with the New South Wales workers' compensation system. Over the last 2 days, we've heard about 52,000 sick and injured workers being potentially underpaid $80 million in what would be the worst wage theft scandal to hit any Australian government. We saw last night that icare's executives defending the extraordinary decision to hand an $11 million contract to the company owned by an icare executive and his son. We're hearing as well about what could be $6 billion undercooking of the books. And on top of that, we've heard that the New South Wales government's own regulator has referred icare to ICAC. I think that what needs to happen here is for the Treasurer to step in and take control of his agency and to put the workers' compensation scheme first and move to replace the icare leadership, so every employer in New South Wales, every sick and injured worker, as well as the 3 million employees who are insured by icare, can have confidence that the Treasurer's agency are being led with people with integrity.
Now, this reporting covers both Victoria and New South Wales, showing just a huge chunk of what's a national problem. But when we break down those issues that you mentioned there, the awarding of contracts, it isn't always within the government's obligations to make sure a contract goes out to a public tender, but it is within their obligations to make sure that it is a good deal for taxpayers. What specifically should have been done here that wasn't?
Well, we still haven't heard the Treasurer give an explanation for why his agency gave out 170 contracts worth $120 million without tender in just 1 year. The Treasurer hasn't provided any explanation that would allow anybody in New South Wales to conclude that this was a good deal for employers who pay the premiums or sick and injured workers who are meant to be helped back to their health through this scheme. The Treasurer has to explain why it is his agency has given out 170 contracts without tender. That's the least he can do. But equally, the Treasurer has got to explain now what steps is he taking to investigate the extraordinary allegations that we heard last night on Four Corners about an $11 million contract handed to the family of an executive at icare. I mean, what does it take for the Treasurer to step in here and say basic standards of governance must apply to this $32 billion agency? The Treasurer says that he's known about the issues at icare for a while. What he has not been able to say is what he's doing about them.
One of the other accusations that came out in this report was the allegation that these organisations were doctor shopping and picking doctors that they thought would toe the line better. Isn't that a really difficult judgment call to make, though, when you're relying on a professional doctor and his medical opinion, or his or her medical opinion, I should say, that you would say that they're towing a line a certain way or the other? Shouldn't there be some consideration given to the fact that they'd be complying with their own standards?
Oh, I don't think anybody disputes that often in workers' compensation, medical claims can be complicated, and nor do would people be surprised by the fact that doctors disagree. But what we saw in Four Corners last night was a deliberate practice of workers' compensation authorities shopping for the advice that suited their financial interests. We saw behaviours that don't pass the pub test. I mean, just because you get a medical opinion that doesn't suit the outcome that you want doesn't mean you keep looking for a doctor to give you what you need to cut a worker off from their benefits. That is a practice which we are trying to stamp out right now in the broader insurance sector, but it should never have a role in a workers' compensation system that's purpose is to get people back to health. And it just raises more questions about why it is, be it icare or others, that governance standards have been allowed to slip so badly that people can get away with this behaviour unchecked. We saw last night an extraordinary case come out about how icare, Dominic Perrottet's agency here, was effectively covering up coercive behaviour being directed against a prison guard. We saw a prison guard who's been waging a battle for justice for 4 or 5 years now, finally finding out that his employer colluded with icare's scheme agent to deny his claim and extraordinary allegations about them wanting to effectively hold him, his marriage and his house to ransom to get the outcome that they wanted. How is that moral? How is that ethical? And more importantly, how is the Treasurer allowed that to happen?
The flip side of this is that these organisations will say that some employees do make claims that are false, and they do have the right to be able to investigate that. I'm not saying that that's in relation to this particular case study that was broadcast last night, but for many people, they do make false accusations of workplace injury. And so doesn't this organisation need to have some kind of system where they can test the veracity of the claim?
Oh, of course. And let's be clear here. Nobody wants to see erroneous claims being agreed to here whatsoever. And it is the case that all authorities require the opportunity to be able to investigate claims. But there are clear rules about how they should do that. There are clear manuals about practices and procedures that they must follow, which are legally enforceable. What we're hearing and what we're seeing is these authorities, icare and others, not following their own standards, not following their own law. Just in December last year, we had an independent report come out into icare that said that in 46% of claims, icare was not in compliance with the legislation. In 46% of claims, icare wasn't following the law. So when we say that the icare leadership has to go, we're saying that to the Treasurer because that is a prerequisite to restore confidence in the scheme. So every employer and every sick and injured worker can have confidence that the people in charge of this very important scheme have the integrity that they would expect and can follow the most basic principles of the law.
Would your argument be that these agencies shouldn't exist, that these assessments should be done in-house in a government department?
Oh, no. I mean, look, we don't quibble with the idea of having a workers' compensation scheme that is designed with a structurally separated component from the agency to the regulator. Of course we don't. That's not the question here. The question here is, how has this gotten so bad? I mean, we have heard allegations about contracts being let out. We've heard secret Treasury documents confirming that $80 million might have been underpaid to 52,000 workers. We know that the government's regulator has referred this agency to ICAC. The question is not whether or not this agency should exist. The question is how precisely did the Treasurer let it get so bad? And that is the question which the Treasurer should be answering on your program and others.